Hello, my name is Leo, and today I'm going to be talking about the biological revolution of puberty. More specifically, I'm going to be talking about hormonal changes and physical growth. So, before I talk about where puberty actually begins, I have to talk a little bit about the endocrine system. So the endocrine system is obviously being utilized all throughout childhood and adolescent development. However, the way I like to picture it is it isn't really kicked into high gear until puberty is initiated. And puberty isn't initiated until the hypothalamus detects this level of body fat, or BMI, body mass index. And that is what kicks the endocrine system into high gear. And it does this by producing a little hormone called gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH for short. So to further illustrate this, I provide a little picture here to the right. So you can see all the different major glands involved in pubertal change, and you can see anatomically. So all the way at the top, you have the hypothalamus, and then all the way at the bottom, you have the different sex glands. Now, let's talk about sex. So this is clearly a very pivotal point during pubertal development, and hormonally, it's characterized by estrogen and androgen. Now, on the right, you can see here in these two little graphs, what they're illustrating is how boys and girls during different stages in puberty can experience different levels of hormones. But what it's really trying to illustrate is how boys will experience a huge spike in testosterone, whereas girls will experience a huge spike in estradiol. Estradiol being the main component in estrogen, whereas testosterone is the main component in androgen. You can kind of fill in the blanks and imagine what happens from there. So now that we've talked about how puberty begins, let's talk about how puberty ends. So puberty, some say it never ends. It does for some, but it doesn't for others. At least physiologically, puberty ends or ceases once the hypothalamus, once again, go figure, detects an optimal level we call the set point of hormones. So once our hormones reach this set point, it will then signal the hypothalamus to reduce production of GnRH, and in turn, it suppresses follicle-stimulating hormones, luteinizing hormones, and adrenocorticotropic hormones. So the feedback loop illustrates this really well because you can see kind of how all the different glands and the hormones are interacting with one another and how they're communicating back and forth to ultimately produce primary and secondary sex characteristics. Now that we've talked about puberty and the hormonal development, this first study actually talks about physical growth. So this first study is pretty cool. It's very diverse because it examines Polish and Israeli children. So maybe some high generalizability there, I don't know. And what they investigated was the height gap. So what they more or less found was individuals, especially boys who experienced early onset puberty, were more likely to be taller than their peers in the future. Surprise, surprise. So the second study was really interesting because it examined a lot of psychological stressors, and more specifically, it found, that among this huge sample size of 38,000, over 38,000 eighth and ninth graders, that the girls were more likely to encounter mental health obstacles associated with early puberty, whereas the boys were more likely to run across mental health obstacles associated with late puberty. So pretty interesting findings there. And certainly, last but not least, we have this very cool study on hamsters. So this hamster study was especially interesting to me because well, number one, I'm sick and twisted and I find this stuff interesting. But number two, this is actually a huge insight into how not only hamster brains work, but also our own brains. So they designed the study by putting juvenile, adolescent, developing hamsters into these cages with black and red lights, I suppose, to sort of induce the state of hostility. And then they were put in these cages with adult, aggressive, characterize it as aggressive male hamsters. So what they ended up finding, this was a relatively longitudinal study. What they ended up finding was that the juvenile hamsters who were placed in this experimental condition with the hostile lights and aggressive male uh, bombarding them for 20 minutes, they found that those juvenile hamsters were more likely to mimic that aggressive behavior once they became an adult hamster, I guess. And so, yeah, moral of the story is monkey see, monkey do. Don't mess with hamsters, I suppose. And yeah, that's about